Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Beyond the Home Study podcast. This is a podcast for parents and especially those who have welcomed or are considering welcoming children into their family through foster care or adoption. So, we are here to help you navigate all of the things after paperwork and placement. So, we're glad you're here. And for today's episode, I am actually solo. I don't even have a guest or anything today. So if you tuned in last week, if you're listening to these kind of as they come out, you likely heard the conversation with my friend Laura Noonan. Laura was asking a lot of different questions about adoption and yeah, just like what goes into the whole process and everything. I'll give you a quick kind of recap in a minute of everything that we talked about so that if you'd like, you can jump back an episode and listen to that. Um, yeah, this is just like a little tiny 2-episode mini series on Adoption 101. So I thought this would be helpful because honestly, I have a lot of people who ask questions like the ones that Laura asked and also the ones that I'll continue to kind of go through today. And I wanted to just have like something that I could quickly send them that covers at least a lot of the basics. Definitely there's no way to like encompass all of this into a couple of episodes, but I figured I could just cover as many of the basics as I could, and not just from a like purely informational standpoint, but also like from a personal standpoint too. And just like share some of our story too along the way. If you did not listen yet and you'd like to go back, here's what we talked about. She asked some different questions about my experience, about bonding, about attachment, which I should, if I didn't, I will link the episode that Laura Rose and I did all about attachment and everything. It was like one of our, I don't know, maybe first 5 episodes. And I'm sure we'll keep talking about it. So there'll be more to come on that. But so attachment, trauma, some challenges that we faced in our process. I like one of the questions that Laura asked me of like, what was one of the hardest things that no one really talked about? And then she asked about like, post-adoption experience, what that's been like for us, navigating some different state regulations. She asked about some different misconceptions about adoption. I feel like one of the things that Laura and I touched on a lot, and we dug into a lot together. And then after I, ended the recording with her, I thought, man, I want to keep thinking through this and like bring on a guest who can help to talk more about this. But it's this idea of like choosing between an agency and a private adoption attorney. And what that really looks like. And then also you get into the whole like how to choose an agency and what is important to you and what you can find out about them. There's a lot that goes into all of that. And I can only speak from my personal experience, which is what I offered to Laura. But there's definitely a lot that goes into that. We talked a little bit about the financial aspect of adoption, and then we kind of wrapped up talking about the family profile book and the matching process. So I'm going to dig into both of those a little bit more because we were at the end of the episode. It was already running really long. We actually recorded at night and it was getting late. And so I'm going to jump into those and like fill in some gaps with that too. And then just talk a little bit more today about some of the topics that we didn't cover. Okay, so that was a little recap. If you are watching on YouTube, I did have to pause, get up, go pick up a baby, and she's on my lap now. Okay, so let's dig a little bit deeper into the actual home study, which, I know this podcast is called Beyond the Home Study, but obviously the home study is a big part of the adoption process. So let's talk about it. The first thing that I will say about your home study, it is not just a visit to your house. It is a plethora of paperwork that has to happen. It is a very frustrating process for most, definitely was for me and for our family. And of course, every state is different. So I will share my experience, and And I'm sure every agency does this differently too. And like every group that you're working with does this differently. But the very first thing that can help you is to get yourself organized. So something that we did that was really, really helpful, and we've actually done 3 home studies, even though we've only done 2 adoptions. And part of that is because we moved states in between, or like in the process of our adoption of our twins. So first thing is get organized. I recommend keeping all of your documents and like copies, even if you have to like scan them and keep your documents, keep copies of everything in a Google folder or however you like to organize your things digitally. Keep a copy of everything. The reason I say this is because there are certainly times human error comes into play in all of these steps, of course, but there have been times that either a document was said that it was not submitted or it was lost in translation somehow, whatever it might be. And I was really glad to have a backup. Also, what's nice is that you can keep everything, you can drop documents in there if your husband or if you have someone who is maybe helping you to gather some different things, they can drop things into that folder, whatever that might be, but get yourself organized. The 2 different times that we have done this, the 2 different times we did this for like a traditional home study for the adoption of our girls, the checklist that you get from the agency, it's organized in the best way that they know how, but it was never organized enough for me. You know what I mean? Like there were just ways that I was like, I would like categorize these things differently or whatever it might be. There are things that will take you 5 minutes to complete, like here, sign this form, sign this document, whatever it might be. And then there are things that are like, you need to get a certified copy of your birth certificate from the state that you were born. And every state, of course, has a different way of tracking those documents down. Some can send it to you overnight. Some it may take 3 to 6 weeks. Some you may need to sign something physically because they don't have any like DocuSign or anything like that. So anyways, there's things like that I wanted to break things down into like what can I control and like what can I just knock out really fast, and then what are the things that I have to send something away and wait for it, or have things that actually have to go like physically in the mail versus things that can be done online, all of that. So get the checklist from your agency and then organize it in the way that you know best. There was a time too that like Josh and we would divide and conquer on things. So I would like categorize things just in a document, this is what I'm taking care of. This is what you're taking care of. We both knew what we were doing. Carry on. So get yourself organized. And that's on the digital side, but then also obviously the physical side of like physical documents that you have to gather, mail that you may be waiting on, certified things, all of that. Get yourself one of those like accordion folders so that you can just start popping papers into all of that and keep a list of the things that you have in there, keep tabs titled what you need to, all of that, like, and then post placement too. Like as soon as I actually probably right before the girls were discharged from the NICU, I went to Target. I got another one of those accordion folders so that I could put all of their like discharge documents that I knew I needed to take home with me, the adoption agreement, so that just in case when we were trying to get on a plane and I'm, saying this is a child with a different last name, I'm able to like prove this is the process that we're going through. So I, grabbed one of those and started putting more papers and all of that.
Hey friends, if you've been enjoying Beyond the Home Study, there are a couple of easy ways to support the show. First, follow and leave a quick 5-star review. It helps other adoptive and foster families find us. Second, we just set up a Buy Me a Coffee page. It's a simple way to say, hey, I love what you're doing, and it helps us to keep the podcast going. You can check it out at buymeacoffee.com/beyondthehomesteady or check out the link below. And as always, we're so grateful you're here.
So get yourself organized for sure. So that's all the paperwork side of things, which Laura had asked me a couple of questions on timeline of that. I think most will probably say like 2 to 6 months is how long that would take. Honestly, if you are really dedicated and you're working on this like after work every night or a little bit every day or whatever it might be, you could probably get it done quicker than that. It definitely took us on the longer end. And part of that is because we also lived in different states along the way, over the past like 5 to 10 years. So then you have to reach out to different states to pull background checks, and there's just a whole host of different things. I really thought about like going through the whole list with you on here, and then I was like, it's not even really worth it, because if you're not, in Kentucky or Ohio, this list is probably going to look different for you. So, um, yeah, definitely reach out to, or like ask about that in an informational meeting that you're in, or an informational call if you want, or there might even be like an FAQ on your agency's website that would be able to give you a list of things you could get started on right away. So then you get to the actual home visit. So for us, we had 2 visits from one of the employees at the agency. And so she, is a social worker, and she would come. She did an interview with us. So Josh and me together, she interviewed us separately, and, just asked like, I'd say pretty basic questions, but if you haven't had one of these before, it might seem a bit invasive of like, how would you say your marriage is going? Have you ever received counseling or psychiatric care? Things like that, that like definitely feel a little bit can feel a little invasive, but of course, it's just all part of the process. Um, so there's an interview portion, and then she or the worker will definitely walk through your house, and we'll be looking for things like, do you have a first aid kit? Do you have smoke detectors, plugged in and working? Do you have fire extinguishers near the kitchen? Some, I think you may even have to have, I think in Ohio, we had to have a fire escape plan. So we actually had to like draw a diagram of our house and, put the route that you would take from each bedroom to escape in the case of a fire. And I remember my mom and dad, when they adopted my sister, when they were doing their escape plan, they actually had to have a fire ladder that they could toss out a window on the second story, which they ended up giving to us in case we needed. And I don't think we need one of those, but we have it in case we need it. It's in one of our upstairs bedrooms. So, yeah, there's just all different things like that. But I would say, if you can get yourself organized and, just chip away slowly but surely, you will be able to complete it. So that is really what the home study really looks like. Um, there are now post placement visits that we are having with our social worker in Ohio. So the post placement visits honestly look a lot like what the home study looked like, not quite as invasive of questions about, your personal self and marriage and things like that, but questions more about the girls and like their health. Have there been any accidents? Have there been any ER visits? Things like that. So that's more of the post placement. And those are, for us in Ohio, those are monthly right now until the adoption is finalized. Okay. So I know I shared a little in the intro when Laura and I were talking about the financial side of things, and how I had shared like more ranges and not as many specifics, but again, I'm happy to share those. Um, but I wanted to talk a little bit about fundraising and also grants. So I touched on those both a tiny bit, but to go a little deeper. So it's really a, you know, personal decision if you choose to fundraise and how you choose to fundraise for an adoption. Um, I was really encouraged when we were pursuing our embryo adoption. I was really encouraged by one of our pastors who said, people, the church and people around you, they want to be a part of your story and your journey, and they want to help, they want to serve in this way. And at the time, we actually went to a church that had an adoption fund and was just very, pro adoption and very helpful and really generous. And so I know that not every church is the same. Where actually the church we're in now is very much the same, where they're extremely generous and have been very generous with our adoption of our twins. And so yeah, I think like his encouragement to me was just let people in and ask for help and see how it goes and really trust the Lord with it. And so we did that. And for our embryo adoption, we had posted just a very simple, we called it our puzzle fundraiser. So we had um, I think, a 500-piece puzzle. I should know this. I think it was a 500-piece puzzle, and we asked for people to donate $40 per piece, and then their name would be written on that piece. And as the puzzle was then we put the puzzle together. And this was like right, it was following COVID times where Josh and I we did a lot of puzzles. We even traded puzzles with like friends and neighbors because we were buying new puzzles online or like from local bookstores and things. And so it was really natural to post on social media saying like, help us complete our next puzzle, and to share a little bit about the adoption journey that we were on. And I will say the other thing that helped with that particular fundraiser was that I had been, and Josh too, we had both been very open about our infertility journey. And so there were a lot of people who, they were praying for a baby for us and were just really eager to jump in and help in any way they could. And so we had all of the funds we needed for our embryo adoption within 40 hours of launching it basically on social media, which was seriously insane. Like it was really crazy. And so when we set out and so for the embryo adoption, our goal I think was around like maybe 15 to 17,000 was our total cost that we were looking to raise or, privately fund. And interestingly enough, we did not qualify for any grants or like assistance or anything with the embryo adoption, not necessarily because of like income level or anything like that, but simply because an embryo adoption legally is simply a transfer of goods. It is not actually an adoption in the sight of, the IRS and everything. So many of the ministries and grants and things like that we had looked into, they did not allow for their funds to go to an embryo adoption. Now, since then, that was in 2021. So since then, I do believe some of them have changed some of the ways that you can apply. So if you are interested in embryo adoption and you're seeking some funding, there may be options for you. I haven't personally looked into any of that in the last couple of years, but I'm happy to do research alongside of you or point you in the right direction if you're interested in that. For the adoption of our twins, we did kind of a similar thing where we did a puzzle fundraiser on social media and ended up raising like close to $20,000 through that, which was really incredible. And we were able, and some of that came in like some larger gifts from friends and family and things. So it didn't it's kind of like that's a lot of money, and we were very thankful that we raised that money, but it took a lot longer, and like it was just kind of a slow build up to that, which um I think it just kind of surprised me. Like I don't know, I guess I had just gotten a little bit like overzealous or like prideful or something, thinking like all this money is just going to come in really quick just like it did for embryo adoption. um and it was definitely like a um, slower fundraiser. I don't know. That's just what it was. And so we had that piece of our funding, and then we had a matching grant that we had qualified for from the church that we were once a part of, because Josh, my husband, is still part of their network. And so we were able to apply for and got a matching grant from them, and they actually partner with Lifesong, which is a ministry that actually does grants like outright. You don't have to be a part of a church that's affiliated with them or anything. You can just go on their website and you can look at the different grant options that they have. So I definitely recommend that. They also have so they have an adoption grant, and then they also have a medical adoption grant. So the way that our situation is working, we are not responsible for any of our girls, our infant twins that we adopted, any of their medical bills before they left the state of California. So that's their 27 and 28-day NICU stays, which I kind of wish I would have seen a bill for that just to see what it would total. But from what I have heard from other people, that can be hundreds of thousands of dollars, even if you have good insurance. And so, thankfully, the way it works with adoption and the way that it had worked in California is that the girls were still on their birth moms, had her name and everything and on her insurance while they were in the state. Now, since we have been home, we have added them to our insurance, and they're covered through our insurance. So so far we haven't needed any like medical grants or anything, but that is available. The other grants that I wanted to mention, just so that you're aware, and this is a little bit more like technical, but it is part of our story because it's something that we're pursuing. So there is actually an IRS adoption credit, and I have the website pulled up because I wanted to be able to look at it. So in 2024, you could qualify for $16,810 in your tax return, to be returned to you for qualified expenses. And the qualified expenses, they break everything down here for you: adoption fees, attorney fees, court costs, travel expenses, including meals and lodging, other expenses directly for the legal adoption, and the list goes on. Expenses that don't qualify are like if you're adopting your spouse's child, a surrogate parent, a couple other things. And then there are some adjusted gross income specifications. So it doesn't mean that you necessarily, if you're above a certain income cap, it doesn't mean that you can't qualify for any of the tax credit. You may be able to apply for an adjusted tax credit. But then if your income exceeds a certain amount, then you don't qualify at all. So that's something just interesting to look into. Obviously, we don't know what that looks like for 2025 yet, which is the year our adoption will be finalized. So we won't be able to apply for any of this until our taxes, tax season 2026. And the interesting part of adopting twins, and we knew this going in, which is one of the reasons we were more okay with a higher cost for this adoption, was that this tax credit is per child. So this adoption credit. So we should be able to qualify for and receive the $16,810 or whatever the amount is in 2025 times two. So that's a really great thing. And that's something that when we were putting some of our personal funds into this, that was something we really were, that banking on, I guess, for lack of a better term, that we're banking on to see some of that come back to us. So that's an interesting one. And then again, just like different states, home studies and everything else works differently. There is actually an Ohio adoption grant program that we will look into once our adoption is finalized, because you have to apply within the year of once your adoption is finalized. And that is actually, if you're a resident of Ohio, you can apply for a $10,000 one-time payment. And now I am still, like, we haven't done any of this yet, so I'm still unsure of how this works alongside of the federal IRS adoption credit, and if it's something you can do both or you choose one, or how that works. So that is still something that, yeah, we're looking into. And it's interesting, it does say on the Ohio government website, it does say that if the child has one or more special needs as defined in the law, prior to the adoption finalization, the parent can actually apply for a one-time payment of $20,000. So I say all that to say, yes, adoption can seem extremely expensive, but there are programs out there like this that can absolutely help. And again, we don't know the outcome of any of this. I'll definitely come back next year and update you all if you want to know what the actual outcome was. Um, but it's pretty cool that there are options like this. Now, I do kind of wish that they would just be able to somehow, some way provide these funds for you before you have to pay your attorney fees and adoption fees and everything, because like for us, for example, we paid the bulk of our fees in September of 2024. And if we see any of these tax credits or grants come back, we actually, the government ones specifically, we won't see any of that until 2026. So, there are options of like taking out loans and doing things like that. But I definitely am not someone who advises to do that necessarily. But of course, every situation is different and everybody has different convictions about that. I just would say, like, I would not necessarily advise taking out a loan to do that. Okay, so that's a little bit of the financial side of things. And then I think the last part that I want to touch on in this episode, and of course we'll do some like ask any questions, like ask me anything, or some different things like along the way. So this is not like by any means the end of this conversation, but just to kind of wrap up this episode specifically, the one thing I just really wanted to talk about, and like if we were sitting down to coffee, I think is something that is just really like deeply on my heart when it comes to adoption, and honestly when it comes to like growing your family in any way, is simply the uncertainty of it all. And I could go through a lot of different instances along the way for us that it just seemed we were very unsure, we were very uncertain. It took a lot of faith for us to just keep stepping forward and moving forward. Yeah, I think it's something that it can be really hard to talk to someone about who hasn't gone through it, because even like I had shared with Laura last episode, you sign contracts and you're sending money and you're doing these things, you feel like it should be something that is like more guaranteed. But for us with embryo adoption, when we adopted 4 embryos, we didn't necessarily think that we would have 4 children from those 4 embryos, but our goal and our plan was to have at least 2 transfers that provided us the family that we had desired. And we did one transfer and had Judah, and we did a second transfer, and both of those embryos didn't stick. And so that completely like came out of left field for us. We were not prepared for that to happen. And then of course it led us to infant domestic adoption to adopt our twin girls, which is absolutely God's plan for our family, and it's beautiful and we're so thankful. But even in that, it's like, okay, this was a high risk pregnancy for their birth mom. She lived across the country from us. We had very little contact with her. There would be weeks and even months that would go by that we wouldn't hear from her. And so that was just we were very unsure. We were very uncertain of like how it all really would go. Um, and so I think that in all of it, as Josh and I processed all of this and like talked about, okay, are we ready to do this again? Is this crazy? All the different things that we're talking through, it's like to love a child and to desire to bring a child into your home like this, it's all a risk. It's a risk. We talked a couple weeks ago with Samantha Miller, who she survived childhood cancer and then walked through infertility and now has 2 beautiful adopted children and would love to have more children, all these different things. But it's like, even, carrying a biological child yourself, or, walking through a different type of adoption or foster care, anything, like it's all filled with uncertainty. And it's a risk, and to love is a risk. And so just, gauge in yourself, like, how ready are you to take on that risk? And of course, you'll have days are that are really hard and you're like, what in the world am I doing? Why don't I just go back to, how things were when I was more sure of this, or whatever that might be. And then you'll have days where you're really full of faith and hope, and you're just trusting that it's all going to work out the way that God intends it to work out in your life. So I think that is definitely something that is just, it's really hard to grapple with if you haven't experienced it. So, um, yeah. So I did say that I would talk a tiny bit more about the profile book at the end of my episode with Laura. And so I just wanted to share a couple quick things, and then I'll make like a reel or post some pictures or something of ours on Instagram. So if you're interested, you can go and check that out. Or if you would like to see the full thing, just reach out to me and I can get it to you. So the one thing that I don't know if I completely talked through with Laura, because it was getting late at the end of the episode, but was that the agency that you work with should guide you through it. So they will give you like a list of parameters of, things that they would like you to include. And then in our case, we actually had someone at our agency that went through it like line by line, picture by picture, reviewed everything, and then sent us feedback and said, consider rewording this section, or consider adding a picture of this, or whatever that might be. And I will say the only thing that we did not, and the feedback is like, take it or leave it. It's not saying like, if you don't do this, we won't share your profile or anything like that. But I will say the one thing that Josh and I chose not to include was a picture of the exterior front of our house, which it's probably fine, like it's probably not a big deal, but I just had this feeling of like, it's so easy to find someone's exact address and things when you have seen a picture of their house and reverse image search and all the things, like probably a little paranoid, but that's something that we chose not to do. We shared a picture of our backyard and, our yard and things like that, but chose not to put like a picture of the direct front of our house. So to each their own with that, but that was something we decided. So again, happy to share that if you are interested. So last thing, one of the questions that Laura asked me about that I was reflecting on a little bit more, and I didn't feel like I gave like a full answer to, and I want to explore more in a future episode, is trauma signs in infancy. And so, you can read different things. If you're part of any Facebook groups, or like I am a part of a neonatal um, abstinence syndrome. Oh gosh, I should know what it's called. It's a group that if you have children in your home through foster care and adoption who have been exposed to drugs and alcohol in utero, it's kind of like a support group for that. So I've seen some things on there that definitely are scary and just very unknown to me. And then I have seen things on there that the children are completely developmentally on track and everything until they reach a certain point, and then they start to see signs, all these different things. And obviously that's just one type of trauma. There can be others in infancy as well, but that's something that I am still learning a lot about. And I think that Laura Rose, my usual co-host in this podcast, she knows way more about all of this than I do. And so we have one episode that we talked a little bit about trauma and attachment, but it would be really interesting to dig into that a little bit deeper, especially like in infancy specifically. So I'm putting that on my list of future topic ideas, and we will explore that. But if you have any questions, truly, I'm an open book. I hope that is made very apparent through these two episodes, that I really want to share with you. I want to help you. I want you to feel as equipped as possible walking into pursuing an adoption, or if you have recently adopted and you're feeling kind of lost and kind of unsure about some different things you're seeing in your child or in yourself, and you want to be able to talk about it, I want to be a support for you there too. So, thank you so much for tuning in to this solo episode. I hope that it was really helpful. And yeah, if it was, please rate us, review us, all the things on all the whatever platform you're listening to. Please do that. And please share this with a friend that you think it could be helpful for. So until next time, thank you. Bye.